Diablo 2, obviously, PvP wasn't really rewarding for players, other than just that feeling that, oh, I killed someone. Are there any plans to actually give players some reward for their effort in PvP action, if there is any, of course?
We do have plans for PvP, but we haven't announced anything yet, so we're not talking about them at this time. But we'll announce something in the not too distant future.
So probably we can expect some more focus on PvP aspect of Diablo, which wasn't really...
There will be more, yeah. We will do more than the previous games, for sure.
Okay, so what kind of aspect of Diablo 2 you decided to enhance? You thought it's really lacking, and you thought that this thing needs to be way better if it's supposed to also transfer to Diablo 3?
Well, we've pretty much gone through every part of the game and looked for ways to make it better. The combat system is a big one, you know, making a combat system that allows for more diversity in how the classes play by leaning more on a health system instead of potions. But you can look throughout the game. A new artisan feature that we announced is a great example of a way that we took a lot of features that weren't even necessarily crafting features, like gambling and rune words, and essentially we took what we liked from those systems and we created a robust, full crafting system that allows us to do a whole big variety of things for the player.
And which aspect of the game, once you started working on Diablo 3, you were like, oh no way it's going into Diablo 3 because it's just lacking over its flow?
Well, I mean, I mentioned potions. That was a big one. We took those out. We didn't. Well, they're not completely out, but we removed the mechanic of just utilizing them over and over again because we didn't feel it was a good overall health model for the game. We also removed town portals because they're a combat exploit. So anything that kind of hurts the depth of combat, we really worked on.
Okay, and what can you tell us about armor sets? Because those obviously were sort of fun to collect in Diablo 2, but you never really got them before they were really useless for your character because you had too high a level.
Yeah, the problems with item sets in Diablo 2, we definitely understand the problems, and we want to solve them. Set items are actually in design right now, so I can tell you exactly what we're going to do to solve them. But if we can't figure out a way to solve that problem, they just won't be in the game. But I'm confident that we've got a couple ideas on the table, and I think they're all pretty good.
We know that boss fights will be maybe a little bit more like WoW, where you actually need some tactic or use certain elements of the environment.
Yeah, I like to compare them a little bit more to Zelda. I think World of Warcraft boss fights are so team-oriented, and that's not really a good description of ours. Probably the closest comparison would just be that we do lots of stage fights where the boss changes over time, which does happen in World of Warcraft, but really Zelda was the game that invented that more or less. Probably not, but they definitely mastered it. That's the game we look to for inspiration. We try and make boss fights that are not just another monster with a lot more health and a lot more damage, but actually plays up to the mechanics of the game and has a really interesting mechanics on their own.
Aren't you a little bit worried that some players that are used to Diablo 2, for example, will sort of be confused with those fights? Like, for example, some bosses now just have 2 unique skills for them, and that's all you basically need to defeat that boss.
No, they're not so far from Diablo 2 that they're jarring. They just feel a lot better. They feel a lot less repetitive because but they're still Diablo characters. They're still designed, and that's why I say I think Zelda's a better comparison, because I think if we made boss fights like World of Warcraft, where you needed a party of people and a certain composition to be able to, and everyone had a role, and you couldn't stand on certain things at a certain time, yeah, that would feel like a World of Warcraft fight. And that's so different than Diablo. So no, I don't think it'll be jarring because I think will feel more like an enhancement to something that existed before.
What are you focusing right now during development, for example? Are you working on certain act? Because I know you guys are trying to polish check. what's that you are currently focusing on in the studio?
The majority of the team is actually working across all 4 acts simultaneously. So they're all in production. But a subset of the team is focusing on polishing the first act. The focus there being that most of our systems we've kind of proven out. We know what they need to look like to ship the game. But there's a couple systems, mainly questing and storytelling, that are not quite to the quality level we want. So we're really focusing on them for the first act so we can get them right and act as an example for when we build those things out in the other acts.
Okay, and we don't know much about resource systems, though are getting overhauled lately. We know that instability isn't supposed to work as it was described earlier, and Fury got changed as well. How do you think you can balance, if you're trying really to go for 5 different resource systems for each class to feel just as powerful and just as good as the other ones?
Well, it's the process of balancing resources is not an overly complex one. It's basically math, and we have lots of guys who are very good at math. So that's the basic. There's a lot of other systems that are more subjective, that are a lot harder to balance than a resource system. It's essentially, like if you're going to balance, say, a skill like magic missile with multiple projectiles versus a skill like Blizzard. Well, they don't even have relationships on certain levels, so that becomes more subjective. Should magic missile do more damage because it tends to hit less targets, or should Blizzard have a bigger radius of effect? Or it's like they're much more subjective. But when you get to resources, it's just well, I need to be able to output this much DPS, per minute. And can I do that? No, you can't. Is it a resource problem? Yes. Okay, adjust the resource.
So you probably can tell right now what is your current concept for either instability or mod.
Oh, we can talk about. I'll talk about where they're at. So we actually removed. We could not get a version of instability we liked. The last version involved buff and debuff that would hit the wizard whenever she went unstable. And it was just it was actually a pretty severe buff. It doubled all the damage on her, but it also increased her crit chance. And it just didn't affect how people played. They didn't notice it most of the time. When they did notice it, it didn't change what they were doing. And that's not really the point of a resource. The point of the resource is it needs to be managed somewhat to change how you play. So now it's called Arcane Power. And it's not dissimilar to mana in a lot of ways, but it regens very, very quickly, and it doesn't grow over time. It is a kind of a flat amount that she has, and then she has lots of abilities and passive skills that enhance it. So Fury is more or less still kind of where it was at. We're just spending time tuning it. A lot of it is like getting the right costs for different skills so that Fury feels like what it's supposed to feel like, but it also doesn't slow the barbarian down. It can make it, if he has to build up Fury too much, it can feel like he's constantly yo-yoing in and out of being awesome, and we don't want that. And then the monk has spirit, and that's probably the best. That's probably the one we're happiest with. He came together really quickly, and it's just his combo moves generate spirit, and those are used for kind of signature moves that he does. Can't do them very often, but they're great. Kind of, some of them are attacks, some of them are escapes, and some of them are kind of recovery. So that one worked out really well. The Witch Doctor's using mana.
You probably hear that a lot, but I'm not going to ask you about cow level. You probably are implementing a lot of references to the previous game, for example. So let's ask about Virg. Is he going to come back with his leg?
Wirt? I would love to bring him back in some form. We just haven't come up with an original idea to do it. I just don't want to stick him in there to do it. I want it to be a cool reason for it. So right now we don't have that. So if we come up with one, we'll definitely put him in. But we've brought characters back from the previous games. The Adria, who's from the original Diablo, is the witch who lives out in the hut. She's coming back as a fairly significant character. And of course, Deckard Cain, Material, they're returning. And but we're also looking for ways to bring back, we may even bring back one of the D2 classes as an actual character who's in the game.
Okay, I'll ask you a question regarding your press conference you had on Gamescom about crafting. Do you think that crafting is really something we can expect to see on high-end level of playing that's dropped off the best bosses, or whatever is the way to obtain the best items in the game?
Yeah, well, one of the key elements of the crafting system is that to acquire some of the best items, you need to be able to make them, you need to have the recipes to make them, and the recipes are actually drops. So it is very likely that you could, off one of the final bosses in the hell difficulty, get a really great recipe as your drop from that boss, as opposed to an item, or in addition to items. And then, yeah, it is our goal that there are some crafted items that are viable as top tier items. We don't want crafting items to dominate. If anything, we probably make them probably the smallest percentage of overall items that you wear, but we do want to make some crafted items obviously the best in their area, so that when you get a max level character, they aren't wearing just rares or just legendaries or just crafted items, but a mix of all three.